So much tech we can fit into one weekly episode of Click. That's why we've got all sorts of treats and wonders online too. From the latest breaking headlines, extra features and kit testing, it's all available 24/7 at bbc.com/. Click.
Hello, this is BBC World News. I'm Ben Bland. Our top stories. Donald Trump says it's game over, but Democrats in Congress issue a subpoena to see the full Mueller report on Russian interference in the 2016 election. The Russian lawyer who had talks with the Trump team tells the BBC the inquiry into his links with the Kremlin was flawed from the start. Ukraine's rival presidential candidates go head-to-head in a live televised debate at Kiev's Olympic Stadium. Tributes to the journalist shot dead during rioting in Northern Ireland. The British Prime Minister calls the killing truly senseless. Across Europe, a fifth day of climate change protests. In central London, more than 1,000 police officers move in and surround the activists. Hello and welcome to BBC World News. Members of a powerful committee in US Congress are formally demanding the release of the full report into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. They've issued a subpoena to obtain the unredacted version of the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. He concluded that the Trump campaign had not conspired with Russia, but was unable to say whether the president had obstructed justice in trying to hinder the progress of the investigation. Our North America correspondent David Willis reports.
Leaving Washington for his Florida retreat, the president must have been hoping this marks a moment of closure. An end to the investigation that has overshadowed his time in office, and which at one time he thought might even spell the end of his presidency. Despite numerous links between the Trump campaign and Russia, Robert Mueller's inquiry found no evidence of a conspiracy to subvert the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. But when it came to the question of obstruction of justice, the report was less equivocal. Attempts to impede the investigation and have Robert Mueller fired failed only because members of the administration, the former White House counsel Don McGahn among them, refused to carry out orders. Based on the facts, we are unable to reach that judgment, the report reads, referring to obstruction of justice. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. To the president, though, the report represents total vindication, and at a White House event for wounded veterans, he could hardly contain his glee.
Having a good day too. It was called No Collusion, No Obstruction.
His view on the whole thing summed up in a triumphant Game of Thrones-inspired tweet. Needless to say, his opponents see it differently.
Well, it's certainly not game over in the sense that there's a lot more that we need to know that's redacted in this report. And again, this report only goes to what is criminal or not criminal. Other actions that may have compromised the president or others around him may or may not be even included in the report.
The special counsel having left the crucial question unresolved, it may now be up to Congress to decide whether or not the president's actions amounted to obstruction of justice. Democrats are already calling for Robert Mueller to give evidence in person. This presidential holiday may not last long. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, a key event in the question of conspiracy is a meeting in 2016 at Trump Tower between the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya and 3 senior members of Mr. Trump's campaign team. The BBC's Moscow correspondent, Steve Rosenberg, has spoken exclusively to Ms. Veselnitskaya for her reaction to the Mueller report.
Как мне кажется, само начало постановки вот этого театра абсурда, который мир наблюдал в течение 2 лет, что происходит в Соединенных Штатах Америки, она изначально была порочна.
The Trump campaign team, the people that met you, they were expecting information from the Russian government. Are you working for the Russian government? Are you in any way linked to the Russian government?
Давайте начнем так. Я когда шла на эту встречу, я совершенно не шла на встречу с командой Трампа. То есть вот мы давайте сразу определимся в терминологиях, да? Для меня эта встреча была частного характера, и она не была моей целью. Мне достаточно можно было передать какую-то справку, которую я подготовила. В любом случае, адвокат работает прежде всего на себя, на свою репутацию, на свое дело. И я горжусь тем, что в числе моих клиентов были многочисленные и государственные органы.
The report may have found no evidence of collusion, but it is quite clear in concluding that Russia tried to interfere in the 2016 US election. In fact, Robert Mueller says your country interfered in a sweeping and systematic fashion. Do you accept that?
Нет, я не принимаю, потому что он неубедителен.
Do you think now that the Mueller report has been published, that is the end of the story?
Нет, я думаю, что это только начало. Но, понимаете, расследовать то, чего не было, это самая большая глупость. Это самое большое, наверное, сегодня политическая безответственность со стороны Конгресса и Белого дома, которые допустили эту ситуацию. В самом начале эту ситуацию надо было решать совсем по-другому, а не впихивать свою страну совершенно в хаос, абсолютный хаос. Раздрай такой, что никто никому не верит, все друг друга в чем-то подозревают. Кому это нужно было? России?
Tens of thousands of people are in Kiev's Olympic Stadium to watch a debate between the 2 remaining candidates in Ukraine's presidential election. The runoff vote will take place on Sunday. The winner of the first round, the actor and comedian Volodymyr Zelensky, is the clear favourite to beat the incumbent Petro Poroshenko. A little earlier, I heard from our correspondent Jonah Fisher, who's at the stadium for the debate.
Yes, it's the only time the 2 candidates, Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedian, and the president, Poroshenko, have been in the same place at the same time. Things have just got underway here. And if I just show you behind me here, if I just let our cameraman come through, you'll see originally there were 2 stages set up, one at each end of the football pitch. You can see one there and one at the other end, because this is normally a football stadium. But what has just happened is that President Poroshenko has gone back to join Mr. Zelensky on that stadium, on that stage back there. And Mr. Zelensky is now giving his opening words, and perhaps we're having a little bit of a taste of why people don't do big political debates in football stadiums, because whenever Mr. Zelensky was speaking, well, as you can imagine, some pretty loud booing from this half of the pitch over here. That's the Petro Poroshenko supporters. So things have just got underway here. We've got Mr. Zelensky really speaking for one of the very few times in this campaign about what he might stand for as president of this country. Then Mr. Poroshenko will speak, and then we're going to have a period of questions and answers.
And given the outcome of the earlier round of voting and the polling, it suggests that Zelensky is out ahead, out in front, despite having no political experience.
Yeah, to be quite frank, President Poroshenko needs something of a political miracle if he's going to pull off a win here. Mr. Zelensky, he won 30% of the vote in the first round, and Mr. Poroshenko got about half of that. And the predictions that we've had over the last couple of the weeks is that those people who didn't go for them are most likely going to go for Mr. Zelensky. He could get as much as 60 or 70%. So it's going to take something pretty dramatic, a huge disaster of some sort, perhaps in this debate, for that to be turned around. The numbers at the moment are very much against President Poroshenko.
And do we know anything of the detail of... Zelensky has spoken about rooting out corruption. Has he explained how he plans to do that at all?
Look, the central thrust of Mr. Zelensky's campaign, when he has actually done a campaign or had any sort of political substance, has been that he'll be new and that he will be different and that President Poroshenko, who we can hear now, he's just taken to the stage to give his opening words. Basically, the criticism from Mr. Zelensky about Mr. Poroshenko is that he hasn't pushed reforms fast enough and that things haven't really changed as much as people expected after the street revolution of 2014. So Mr. Zelensky has, in pretty vague terms, promised to do more and faster, but we really haven't had much substance from Mr. Zelensky. And indeed, Mr. Zelensky has largely avoided serious interviews, debates like this, so people haven't really been able to put the difficult questions to him.
And Jonah, the outcome of this election will determine a crucial relationship, won't it? That of the relationship between Ukraine and Russia.
That's right. That's in the back of everyone's mind here. Ukraine is, of course, still fighting a war in the east of this country with a Russian-backed forces. So how any new president might interact with Russia is a crucial question. Mr. Poroshenko has gone out of his way to say that Mr. Zelensky is the preferred choice of Russia, of Vladimir Putin. He's put, indeed, the face of Vladimir Putin on some of his campaign posters suggesting a vote for Mr. Zelensky would be a vote for Vladimir Putin. So people are very much thinking in those sort of terms. But at the moment, Mr. Zelensky's message, when he has made one, has been that he'll be a unifying figure, that he will try and bring an end to the conflict in eastern Ukraine, and that he will not concede any grounds in terms of that occupied territory in eastern Ukraine, and will continue trying to get back Crimea, which of course Russia has annexed.
Jonah Fisher there for us in Kiev. A journalist has been shot dead in Londonderry in Northern Ireland in what police are treating as a terrorist incident. Dissident Republicans are being blamed for the killing of 29-year-old journalist Lyra McKee during rioting late last night. The trouble broke out after police raided a number of homes in Derry's Cregan area. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has described the death of Ms McKee as shocking and truly senseless. Andy Moore's report contains some flash photography.
Police said they went into the Cregan area of the city to search for firearms. They were met with rioting. More than 50 firebombs were thrown and 2 cars set on fire. During the disturbance, a man crouched in the street with a handgun and fired up to 10 times towards police lines. Miss McKee was hit as she stood beside a police Land Rover. The 29-year-old freelance journalist died in hospital from her wounds. Just before she was shot, Miss McKee tweeted a photo of the scene with the caption, "Absolute madness." A fellow journalist described what happened.
Know the distinguishable sound, the pop, pop, pop of a gun. And when I heard that, I took cover behind a wall. But directly in my line of sight, I saw there was a police Land Rover kind of right in front of me. And I saw a woman lying on the ground.
Police said they believed the murder was the work of dissident Republicans in the new IRA.
This is a horrendous act. It's unnecessary, it's uncalled for, it's totally unjustified. But not only is it the murder of a young woman, it's an attack again upon the people of this city.
You know, when I left religious education at 16...
Miss McKee has been described as a rising star of journalism who had only just moved to Derry. Here she was 2 years ago, arguing for LGBT rights.
We need to have conversations, difficult conversations, and fight for the hearts and minds of those who oppose us.
This was the message to the men of violence from the priest who anointed Lyra in her hospital bed.
Stop. I would say that what you're doing is today is Good Friday agreement. This is the day when Christians celebrate Jesus' conquering of sin, death and evil, and you're actually adding to that today. You're actually what you do is insulting to Christians.
From across the political divide, there's been condemnation of the murder.
Those people who carried out this attack do not have any support. Those people who carried out this attack have attacked all of us. They've attacked the community, they've attacked the people of Derry, they've attacked the peace process, and they've attacked the Good Friday Agreement.
This was an attack on everybody in Northern Ireland. It doesn't matter if you're a Catholic or a Protestant, British or Irish. This is an attack on democracy.
Police have called the murder calculated and callous. They're now appealing for calm. Andy Moore, BBC News.
At least 13 people have died. Many more are injured after a wall collapsed in South Africa at the start of an Easter church service. Emergency services said 29 people were taken to hospital in the coastal province of KwaZulu-Natal. It's thought heavy rainfall may have been the cause of the collapse. Stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come, the troubling legacy of the Columbine High School shooting 20 years on.
Stars and stripes at half-mast outside Columbine High. The school sealed off, the bodies of the dead still inside.
I never thought that they would actually go through with it.
One of the most successful singer-songwriters of all time, the American pop star Prince, has died at the age of 57.
He was a great musician and, a genius.
For millions of Americans, the death of Richard Nixon in a New York hospital has meant conflicting emotions. A national day of mourning next Wednesday, sitting somehow uneasily with the abiding memories of the shame of Watergate.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
Committees issued a subpoena for the unredacted version of Robert Mueller's report into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Thousands of people have gathered in the Olympic Stadium in Kiev to watch the two presidential candidates in Ukraine take part in a debate. Climate change activists across Europe have stepped up their protests against what they perceive as government inaction against global warming. In Paris, demonstrators cordoned off corporate headquarters with police-style tape. They brandished slogans that said, "Climate crime scene." In Rome, the Swedish teenage activist Greta Thunberg addressed a packed rally. She said adults had given false hope to the young. And in London, the Oscar-winning actor Emma Thompson joined a mass protest in a show of solidarity. Sarah Walton reports.
It was a peaceful start to day 5 of the protest, with the Easter holiday keeping many commuters off the roads. There was less disruption to traffic, but demonstrators said they were as determined as ever to remain.
I've come out to do my bit, and we're going to come back on Monday and we'll be getting arrested again and probably maybe locking on here again or doing whatever's necessary until the government's prepared to speak with us.
Police have been making arrests, moving in groups to carry away protesters lying on the ground. But many of those detained have returned to the demonstrations as soon as they were released. The Home Secretary Sajid Javid says they have no right to cause misery for the millions of people who are trying to lead their daily lives. I expect the police to take a firm stance and use the full force of the law. They have my full backing in doing so. And Scotland Yard says all rest days for officers have been cancelled, but the operation is now keeping them from core duties.
This is very, very frustrating for us because this is going to cost millions. And the sufferers from this will be the local communities in local boroughs where officers are being taken from the community areas. And the funding and money has to be found to deal with what we're doing. But the knock-on effect will be that my colleagues at some stage need to have their time off, need to have their breaks, they're human beings, and it needs to be paid for.
This morning, a small group staged a protest at Heathrow Airport, but were quickly moved on by police who had promised a robust response to any attempt to disrupt travel there. This lunchtime, police have begun making arrests again, but as Extinction Rebellion say more people are joining their organisation every day, it's still not clear when the protests will end.
That report from Sarah Walton. Let's check on the live pictures, the scene in Oxford Circus. And as you can see, the big difference is the pink yacht that had been parked at the centre of the junction has now been removed. It had been parked up there for several days, the activists saying they were prepared to stay put for up to 2 weeks. But as we were hearing in Sarah's report, the police moving in. You can see just towards the bottom of the screen, there's a line of police officers, a police cordon there, and they have been stopping people getting into the middle of Oxford Circus. It's the key junction in the middle of London's main shopping street, and they seem to have contained the bulk of the activists there. They were letting people out but not letting people in. As you can see, fairly busy around there. Of course, the long bank holiday weekend and people out in force shopping, perhaps, on a sunny day in London. But that's the latest scene where those protests were focused up till now. Saturday marks the 20th anniversary of the shooting at Columbine High School, and for the final time, the city of Littleton, Colorado, is holding events to mark the tragedy. 13 people died, more than 20 were injured, when 2 heavily armed students opened fire inside the school before killing themselves. That troubling legacy has had a lasting impact on the community. The BBC's Neda Tawfiq travelled to Colorado to see how the shooting shaped the lives of survivors and the nation.
At this quiet memorial in Littleton, Colorado, lies a lost piece of America's innocence. 13 crosses bear the names of the students and teacher who died on April 20th, 1999. Their lives taken suddenly when 2 high school seniors opened fire inside Columbine High School. They have been laid to rest, while those who survived still carry the trauma of that day.
A couple of us on the speech team started traveling to speak to other students to tell our story.
It took Samantha Havlin more than a decade to seek help for PTSD and survivor's guilt. She managed to escape the shooting, but her close friend Rachel Scott did not.
I couldn't even bring myself to personally give her things back to her family because I didn't know how to say that I'm sorry that I survived.
At the time of Columbine, school shootings were rare. And so when the horrific news spread of what happened here, it was a genuine shock to the nation. Now, though, they are all too frequent. The current generation of students run drills on how to survive if their school is next. And Columbine isn't even among the 10 deadliest mass shootings in the country.
Columbine, we are back!
As principal, Frank DeAngelis led his school through a very public grieving process, one that continues until today.
With great pride.
And every time there's another shooting, he makes it his mission to call the principal of that school to lend his support.
I know what they're going through, and even though they're kids from Parkland or Newtown, Connecticut, they're all of our kids. And I think we need to rise up as a nation. And I really give credit to the kids from Parkland last year when they said basically enough is enough.
Fight for your lives before it's someone else's job.
In the immediate aftermath of the shooting in Parkland, Florida that killed 17 people, the students became outspoken activists traveling the nation. But the loss of 2 more classmates to apparent suicide has left many survivors realizing they need to look after themselves as well.
On the positive side, we've gotten to achieve national change so that it never really happens to anyone else, or we've done our best to take steps in that direction. But from a personal perspective, we have really largely ignored the treatment of ourselves, and we're suffering now at this point because we need help and we're not getting it, we're not giving it to ourselves.
Generations of Americans have been permanently scarred by the troubling legacy of school shootings. 20 years on from Columbine, survivors want to know, how many more have to suffer before something changes? Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, Littleton, Colorado.
Under China's Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing has signed several projects with Pakistan to get a strategic foothold in the region. Pakistan's Gwadar port is part of the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and it's already operational. The local fishing community says it's ruining their livelihoods.
हम लोग मछली पकड़ के आते हैं, बेचते हैं, अपने घर चलाते हैं.
We earn our livelihood by selling fish.
हमारा समंदर है, सब कुछ होएगा.
The sea is everything to us.
यही समंदर है. को जाते हैं, रात को ये बोलते हैं पोर्ट के पास नहीं जाओ, एम्बेसी वाले हम लोग पकड़ते हैं.
When we go fishing at night, we are blocked by officials from going near the port. But night is the best time to go fishing.
पकड़ते भी जाओ इधर मुर्गा बनो. अरे किस लिए मुर्गा बनो? हम पेट के लिए मच्छी पकड़ने यहाँ आते हैं, मुर्गा बने हम क्यों?
Even if we fish during the day, they tell us not to come near the Gwadar port.
हम ऊपर आने जाने का, किश्ती सफा करने का कोई.
Officials sometimes chase us on a boat and then ask us to squat as a punishment. We need to fish to earn a living. Why are they punishing us for that?
कल ये अपना सड़क बना रहा है.
The fisherman and Gwadar's market are dependent on each other. Without one, the other will die. We are not against the building of this road, but we want the authorities to consider our needs too.
माछी नहीं होगा, बाजार भी ग्वादर का नहीं चलेगा. ये हम लिख के देते हैं आपको.
Don't forget you can get in touch with me on social media. You'll find me on there at Ben and Bland. This is BBC World News. Thanks for watching.
Hello once again, just want to bring you right up to date with the European weather scene for the next few days or so. Some fine and settled weather to be had thanks to a big area of high pressure centred up over Scandinavia just at the moment. It's going to gradually track its way into the north.
Some people move on, but not us. On April 26th.
Even if there's a small chance, we owe this to everyone who's not in this room to try.
We will. Whatever it takes. Avengers Endgame. This film is not yet rated.
BBC One Northern Ireland with Rita Chakrabarty.
Politicians from all sides take part in a vigil for the journalist Lyra McKee, shot dead last night in rioting in Londonderry. Petrol bombs were thrown at police with vehicles set alight, and a gunman opened fire, hitting the 29-year-old. Lyra McKee was described as one of the most promising journalists in Northern Ireland. Her partner paid her this tribute.
It's left me without the love of my life, the woman I was planning to grow old with. We are all poor for the loss of Lyra. Our hopes and dreams, and all of her amazing potential, was snuffed out by a single barbaric act.
We'll bring you the latest and be examining the causes of this outbreak of violence in Londonderry. Also tonight. Police step up their tactics against climate change protesters in London as arrests rise to nearly 700. Dishing up during the Easter holidays, why schools and youth centres in poorer areas are feeding local children outside of term time.
Let's all experience something.
And the internet sensory sensation called ASMR and how it's gone mainstream. Good evening. In Londonderry, a vigil for the murdered journalist Lyra McKee has been attended by politicians on both sides of the community. The 29-year-old was struck by a bullet as she was observing an outbreak of violence in the Cregan district last night. At the vigil, her partner, Sarah Canning, paid tribute to her as a tireless advocate and activist and described her death as senseless. Police have started a murder inquiry and have blamed dissident Republicans for her death. Here's our Ireland correspondent, Emma Vardy.
Shots ring out, a frightening throwback as violence erupts in Derry. Here, you see a gunman firing at police lines. Then they appear to try to remove the evidence. More than 50 petrol bombs were thrown, say police, and officers were shot at up to 10 times. Journalist Lyra McKee was hit as she stood beside an armoured police vehicle. A reporter nearby tried to help.
I could see a Land Rover and there was a young woman lying on the ground beside the Land Rover unconscious, and her friends were beside her. They hadn't realised what happened. Someone turned around and saw her on the ground and they just started screaming, and it's a sound I'll never forget.
Described as a rising star, Lyra McKee was a gay rights activist and freelance journalist.
Within the LGBT community, we have a saying that we tell people. We tell them it gets better. And what I realised that day was that it gets better for some of us. It gets better for those of us who live long enough to see it get better.
Just after 11 o'clock, Lyra McKee was taken to hospital in a police vehicle, but died of her wound. Officers are treating her death as a terrorist incident and say a murder inquiry has started. This morning, there was dismay that tensions continue to resurface. This city already harbours many memories from Northern Ireland's bloody past.
It's terrible. Felt ashamed to be a Derry man. Those sort of things should be long gone. Should not be happening now. And we need people like Lyra. I'm sorry.
I couldn't believe it. It just feels to me as though we've gone 10 steps back again, you know, so just that type of violence in this town and the loss of a young life. It's very sad, and I'm very sad because this is a lovely town.
Police believe the violence was orchestrated by the group known as the New IRA. Police say dissident Republicans have been planning to attack officers over the Easter weekend. Yesterday, they carried out raids here on Derry's Cregan estate, looking for firearms. The response was the violence, which led to Lyra McKee's death.
This is a horrendous act. It's unnecessary. It's uncalled for. It's totally unjustified. But not only is it the murder of a young woman, it's an attack again upon the people of this city.
Hundreds lined the streets as political leaders from all the main parties and both sides of the political divide came together in a show of unity.
We have political leaders, religious leaders, civic society, all standing shoulder to shoulder to say we do not want to see this, we're not going backwards.
We all have to stand against this. This is an attack on democracy. It's an attack on everybody that's standing here today.
Lyra McKee's partner publicly grieved.
And it's left me without the love of my life, the woman I was planning to grow old with. We are all poor for the loss of Lyra.
Despite the gains Derry has made, today there is a deep sense of loss. Many hope to see a renewed stand against those who threaten to take the city back to its violent past.
And we can talk to Emma now. Emma, it is over 20 years since the Good Friday Agreement. Many will be wondering how violence can still be happening.
Well, Derry has been a focus of dissident activity for a very long time. Of course, today, paramilitary groups have much less capacity to carry out the kind of attacks that they once did during the Troubles. But nevertheless, some much smaller groups do still exist, dissident groups who believe in using violence to try to bring about a united Ireland. And police here try to counter that threat every single day. Now, police say that it is the so-called new IRA that pose the greatest threat here in Derry, and one of the biggest problems for communities really is the attempts by these groups to try to influence young people to come out onto the streets and to take part in their activities too. And last year we saw a week of rioting here in Derry. In January we saw a car bomb detonated outside the city's courthouse. Now, for people who call this city their home, well, they are somewhat accustomed, if you like, to knowing that violence will occasionally spill out onto the streets. But even during the darkest days of Northern Ireland's Troubles, only one journalist was ever killed. So what happened last night really has provoked a great sense of shock. And there is a sense that the death of a journalist will have further damaged these dissident groups, the image of these dissident groups in people's eyes.
OK, Emma, many thanks. Emma Vardy there. Hundreds of police officers have closed in on protesters in central London as demonstrations entered a fifth day. So far, nearly 700 people have been arrested. Protesters want to raise awareness of climate change and are demanding a drastic speeding up of the government's plan to cut carbon emissions. But many argue that their target is unrealistic. Sangeeta Maiska reports.
Following 5 days of disruption, the police began the work of removing the pink boat, the rallying point for climate change protesters in the heart of the UK's busiest shopping district, Oxford Circus. Earlier today, 1,000 police officers had poured onto London's streets, drafted in to end the climate change protests that have brought parts of the capital to a standstill. The Home Secretary says he expects the police to use the full force of the law to end the disruption.
It is certainly different to the sort of protests we're used to, and of course we are an organisation that learns, and we will debrief this operation once it's finished, and we will learn what works and what didn't work. And so if groups choose to take this approach again in the future, we'll be far better placed to deal with it more swiftly, I think.
At Waterloo Bridge, a stone's throw from Parliament, it's a game of cat and mouse. Campaigners are lifted and removed by officers, some to return hours later to do the same again. In 5 days, nearly 700 arrests and no end in sight.
So I've come out to do my bit, and we're going to come back on Monday and we'll be getting arrested again and probably maybe locking on here again or doing whatever's necessary until the government's prepared to speak with us.
Today in France, officers used very different tactics. At the French bank, Société Générale, police used pepper spray to remove climate change protesters who'd blocked employees from getting into work. Back at Oxford Street, retailers claimed the disruption has cost them millions of pounds in lost trade. But campaigners say it's a price worth paying until their calls for radical government action to combat climate change are acted on. Sangeeta Maiska, BBC News.
Two women aged 22 and 36 have died after they got into difficulties in the water off Aberdeen Beach. The emergency services were sent to the scene at around 1:45 this morning after reports of two women in the water. They were picked up by the lifeboat service and taken to hospital, but both later died. Police Scotland say that the two women, who were foreign nationals, lived in the city. A court in California has been hearing from some of the 12 children who were imprisoned, shackled and abused for years by their own parents, David and Louise Turpin. Both pleaded guilty in February and within the last half hour have been sentenced. Our North America correspondent Sophie Long was in court. Sophie.
Well, Rita, that sentencing hearing has just drawn to a close, and both David and Louise Turpin were sentenced to life in prison for the abuse they inflicted upon 12 of their 13 children. There were hugely emotional scenes in that courtroom, as you can imagine. Two of their children read written testaments. They sat there in court crying as they watched and listened. The first, one of their daughters, visibly frail, approached the podium. She said, "My parents took my whole life, but I am taking it back. I am a fighter and I am strong." The next, one of their sons read a statement from one of his sisters and then his own words. He said, "I cannot describe in words what we went through." He said he still has nightmares about his siblings being chained up. He said that is the past and this is now. And he talked about how much he learned since January when they were freed. He said he'd learned to ride a bike and to swim. Now, another of the children said she loved her parents and she wanted to be able to visit them and talk to them on the phone. They believed that everything they did was to protect us. After we'd heard from the children, Louise Turpin spoke from her seat. She said that she was sorry for everything that they'd done. They're very proud of their children and they loved them more than they could imagine. The judge said the only good thing that they had done was to plead guilty so their children didn't have to relive the trauma that they had suffered. It's likely that both of them will spend the rest of their lives in prison.
Sophie, thank you. A 74-year-old man in North Wales has suffered life-changing injuries after being shot with a crossbow. The man, who said he was trying to fix a faulty satellite dish outside his home when he was hit, managed to make his way back into his home on the outskirts of Holyhead and raised the alarm shortly after midnight. He's in a critical condition in hospital and police are investigating. Tens of thousands of people in Ukraine have gathered in the Olympic Stadium in Kiev for a debate between the country's two presidential candidates. The current president, Petro Poroshenko, is taking on his challenger, the comedian Volodymyr Zelensky, before Sunday's runoff vote of the presidential election. Mr. Zelensky has a commanding lead in the opinion polls despite having no political experience. Schools and community centres in parts of the country are increasing support over the Easter holidays for poorer families. Figures show almost 3 million children with working parents are living on the poverty line in the last year in the UK, a record number. The government says it's investing £9 million for more access to holiday clubs. Frankie McCamley has been to a youth centre in Manchester that's opening its doors at Easter for the first time.
School's out, and it's time for some good old-fashioned fun. After a morning of pretty impressive activities, everyone at this youth centre in East Manchester is working up an appetite.
I'm eating mashed beans and sausage.
And how is it? Is it good?
Yeah. In holidays, I'm so bored. But now, it's just like, it feels amazing to be here.
How does being here compare to being at home?
It's better here because you get some fresh air.
The scheme is in an area where almost half of families live below the poverty line. Food is free today and throughout school holidays, but in term time, even though meals only cost £1, some parents can't always afford to pay. What's it like when you see those young children and you can see that they clearly can't afford to buy that food?
It's heartbreaking. They sort of walk up and down and they're watching other children, what they've got. They think we're just behind there serving, but we're not. We're eyes all over, watching for that hungry child or something's not right.
And nobody will go hungry here. No one will go hungry.
With the support of a government grant and money from the private sector, it's the first time they've opened for Easter, and it's a lifeline for some working parents.
In school holidays, I know if I've not got, they can come in and they can have breakfast. And I know they'll get a dinner. It's helped me. I've been really, really stuck this past 12 months, 18 months, really.
Manchester has one of the highest levels of child poverty in the UK. Every week, around 1,000 children and teenagers come to this youth centre. And it's not just here. Smaller schemes are being set up across the country over Easter in schools, churches and community centres.
Hey, are you okay?
Yes.
Around half of the food served here is delivered by volunteers from a local food.
We would like to see more funding at Easter time so that we could work with more charities who want to do the Easter holidays.
Staff say there still aren't enough schemes open at this time of year to feed those who need it.
Our partners, our charity members, they just don't have the resources to provide school holiday food in the summer, the 6 weeks, as well as Easter, so they're making hard choices.
Lining up ready, in your position.
And it's during the holidays when money can be tight.
No.
Although children's clubs do relieve a bit of tension, council budgets are stretched, so it will be a struggle to provide resources like this everywhere. Frankie McCamley, BBC News in Manchester.
This month, the singer-songwriter Billie Eilish became the youngest person to reach #1 in the UK album charts. The video of her single Bad Guy uses one of the fastest growing trends on the web. Known as ASMR, it involves sounds and whispers recorded into a microphone which stimulate tingling feelings in many users. Earlier this year, an ASMR advert played during the Super Bowl, more proof that the trend has gone mainstream. Our media editor Amal Rajan is all ears.
Let's all experience something together.
Nearly 17 million people have seen this ad on YouTube since it was first played during the US Super Bowl in January. It's the marketing world tapping into the biggest internet phenomenon you might not have heard of. It's called ASMR.
ASMR stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, and it's a tingling sensation that generally starts at the top of the head and moves back down the neck and across the shoulders.
Dr. Tom Hostler is one of a small number of academics researching the intense and calming effect certain intimate sounds have on many of us.
I'm not the best drawer.
There are over 10 million ASMR videos on YouTube alone, along with so-called satisfying videos such as this one. So we asked members of a dance academy to explain the appeal.
Very tingly and very I think it just relaxes me, I'm able to watch it.
I've been given a massage in my brain. It's just too much stress, so when you find some free time, you just like to listen to calming and relaxing sounds.
Let's go for it.
For some, ASMR is a career. Emma Smith, known as Whispers Red, makes ASMR videos for a living in what she calls her tingle shed.
What are you setting out to do?
Calm the viewer.
I am definitely an ASMR experiencer. Because that was like there was a waterfall in my head.
ASMR has entered popular culture. Earlier this month, 17-year-old American Billie Eilish topped the UK charts. As GQ magazine puts it, get your pop and ASMR fix all in one place.
Sensual rather than sexual, intimate rather than erotic, ASMR could revolutionise advertising, because these videos are a zone in which you're relaxed, focused and highly receptive to what you see and hear.
Through ASMR, the internet provides a soothing antidote to the age of overload. The distinction between the online and offline worlds is collapsing, one whisper at a time.
Amal Rajan, BBC News.
Well, there's more throughout the evening on the BBC News channel. We're back with the late news at 10 o'clock. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.
Good evening. Vigils have been held in London Derry following last night's murder of a woman who was a journalist and writer. 29-year-old
I'm Lindsay Horan. I played midfield. I played for the Portland Thorns and the U.S. Women's National Team.
I don't want her to take with the laces there. Sinclair, seeing if she can find a little
football.
Some people move on, but not us. On April 20th.
All these things.
Sam Kerr, striker, Chicago Red Stars, Australia. I think my best skill is my pace. I play off a lot of instinct and sometimes think quicker than a lot of people, and I don't think maybe it's a skill, but it's just something that I'm gifted with, having, quick instincts and I guess being a goal snake.
Je m'appelle Saki Kumagai. Je joue milieu de terrain à Olympique Lyonnais et Japon.
I take pleasure from football. It's life and it's my passion. If football doesn't exist, I can't express myself. Without football, life is less interesting and too serious.
So the vote is now open. Go to bbc.com/women's football and make your choice for who you think should win the BBC Women's Footballer of the Year award. You can find full details on our privacy notice on the BBC Sports website. Sophie, I reckon if you put on your boot, you'd be on that list.
Every year I keep telling you, I might just get inspired.
There you go.
So I hope this is the year.
Let's hope so.
Thanks for the sport, Peter. Thank you. Now, international supermodel Naomi Campbell has travelled to Lagos to launch Arise Fashion Week. That's an event that showcases diversity and the best fashion designers from across Africa. Speaking to the BBC's Mayeni Jones, she began by explaining why it's important for her to keep coming back to the West African country.
Well, last year I was here as just Naomi, doing Arise as a model. This year I'm in partnership with Arise, so it's Arise with Naomi Campbell. And this year we've brought some people, other designers and editors from America, from London, from Europe, and we want the world to know and see and to be able to get out there the perception, to change the perception they have, and to see the young emerging designers from all across Africa. They're talented, and the African designers deserve the right to be championed just like every other designers around the world.
Do you think Africa should have a global fashion capital like Milan or Paris? Do you think that might help?
Yes, it would be good. It would be good if we could have that here. Right now we've got many different fashion weeks, but right now what's important is that we get in the outside fashion brands to recognize this continent as African. This continent recognizes their brands, a part of making their brands who they are. We have a huge influence in what we wear and how we wear it.
Which African city do you think could be a potential?
It's difficult, it's a big continent. So for me, I want to cross all tick all boxes. It has to be north, east, south and west.
So it'd be like a rotating
It has
thing.
to be.
What do you make of Western designers using some of these African textiles
It's great
and designs?
if you give the credit.
Do you think that that's cultural appropriation?
I haven't really thought about it like that. I just think of it as a simple, very simplistic in the sense of just if you're going to do it, give the credit.
Why do you think Western designers have been reluctant to credit African textile makers?
Because we haven't really, partly our fault, actually. As you say, we've got no real centre, but now we do, and now we have, and uniting on all fronts and coming together and opening ourselves to letting people come and see what we have here is the best way to do it, and little by little that's what's going to happen.
Well, before we go, a quick look at our top story today on Focus on Africa. Mali's entire government, including the Prime Minister, has resigned following an upsurge of violence in the country and pressure from protesters. That's all from the program. From me and the rest of the Focus on Africa team, thanks for your company.
Is a revolution in manufacturing set to change the world?
If there's a crash, nothing is broken.
Will manufacturing be transformed by 3D printing?
If you can make anything anywhere with unlimited complexity, then it's really groundbreaking.
Can robots create a better future?
We have finally succeeded in recognizing hundreds of different objects.
Meet the disruptors. Visit bbc.com/The Disruptors.
Hello, just want to bring you right up to date with a number of world weather situations. First of all, let's get into South Asia, where in recent weeks some 200 people or more have died in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and the northern states of India due to the intensity of rainfall, flash flooding and thunderstorm activity. And we're not quite done with that situation just yet, because there are some thunderstorms to come over the next couple of days, particularly from the south of India up towards the Bangladesh area. There are some warnings out from the local authorities, so please be aware of that situation. We're not quite done with it just yet. There's heat at the moment across the eastern side of the state, something slightly cooler moving in from the Great Plains and the Midwest, and that makes the boundary between those two air masses very active. This is the same system that in the middle part of the week brought some 4 inches of rain to parts of Arkansas and Louisiana, and we're not quite done with it just yet. A lot of thunderstorm activity there. Some of it could turn tornadic, and then just as that system moves away, we've got this little piece of the wraparound of the weather front yet to move down through the lakes and across those eastern states. It then quietens down, but in the short term, please be aware that there could be some really dangerous weather associated with those weather fronts before they clear away and things begin to settle down, at least for a while. You'll see by Sunday in New York, you'll be looking at sunshine rather than torrential rain. And torrential rain is exactly what they've had quite widely across Iberia. The remnants of it are still there to be had through the rest of the weekend, urged into the eastern side of Iberia by a very noticeable and strong wind. There could well be up to 100 millimetres of rain in some locations here, but it is not by any means all doom and gloom across Europe during the holiday weekend. Yes, low pressure dominant across Iberia, but high pressure is sliding its way out of Scandinavia to become the dominant feature right across the heart of the Europe. So there will indeed be some spring sunshine and indeed some warmth to go with it. Take care from me. Bye-bye.
This is BBC World News Today. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. Our top stories. An American couple who tortured 13 children in a so-called House of Horrors sentenced to life in prison. Donald Trump says it's game over, but Democrats in Congress issue a subpoena to see the full Mueller report on Russian interference in the 2016 election. Tributes to the journalist shot dead during rioting in Northern Ireland. The British Prime Minister calls the killing truly senseless. And across Europe, a 5th day of climate change protests in central London. More than 1,000 police officers move in and surround activists. Hello and welcome to World News Today. Let's start in the United States because in the last half hour, a couple in California have been sentenced to life in prison for starving their 13 children. David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 counts of cruelty, torture and false imprisonment in February. They were arrested last year after their 17-year-old daughter managed to escape the family home and raise the alarm. Before the sentencing, some of the Turpin's children read out statements in court which reduced their parents to tears. Well, our North America correspondent Sophie Long was in court and she joins us now. Sophie, obviously distressing details in this case. Just want to warn people straight away. But what did happen in court?
Well, both David and Louise Turpin were sitting in the courtroom behind me, and they were both sat there crying as two of their children read written statements to a packed courtroom. The first, a very frail young woman, visibly upset, walked past her parents to the podium, and she said that my parents took our life from us, but we have taken it back. She said, I am a fighter and I am strong. After that, one of their sons made his way to the podium. He read a statement on behalf of his sister, and then in his own words, he said that it's hard to put into words what his parents put them through, but that is the past and this is now. He said he still has nightmares about what happened, namely his siblings being chained to their beds. But he said he'd learned so much since January when the children were freed. He said he'd learnt to ride a bike, which he enjoys, and he'd learnt to swim as well. Another of their children said that she loved her parents very much and she believed that they did everything that they did to protect them. After they'd heard from their children, Louise Turpin sat in her seat and she said she was sorry for everything that they had done and they loved their children more than they could ever know. The judge told the pair as he sentenced them that the only thing that they had done right was to plead guilty to those 14 counts so that their children were spared reliving the trauma that they suffered over many years. Now, as you rightly say, the outside world was only alerted to the horrendous abuse that these children suffered in January of last year when one of their daughters, 17 at the time, escaped through a window and she used a deactivated cell phone to call the emergency services. In the 911 call, you can hear her tell the operator, we're a family of 15, 13 children, our parents abuse us. She said that two of my little sisters are chained to their beds right now. She said that the house was so filthy, sometimes she couldn't breathe, and that she didn't know what medication was. Now, when the police arrived at the property, they found 12 of the children were severely malnourished. Now, some of the siblings were in their late 20s, but prosecutors said they looked like young teenage children because they had been starved for so many years. Now, both the Turpins pleaded guilty to 14 counts, including adult abuse, child endangerment, torture and many counts of false imprisonment. It is likely that they will spend most of the rest of their lives in prison.
Sophie, that's just a staggering list of details there, and very distressing. Some of them, the numbers involved here, the number of children is so large. Will there be any questions now about how this was allowed to happen? Do the authorities need to answer any questions?
Well, we are expecting to hear from the authorities that one of them has been making a speech just outside the courthouse now, but that sentencing hearing has just come to a close. But of course, there are many questions being asked of the authorities and the local community. This all happened in a town called Perris, halfway between San Diego and Los Angeles, a sleepy suburban town. And this abuse, the counts that they admitted to, took place between 2010 and last year. So over 8 years, these children were starved and found to be severely malnourished when they were rescued just over a year ago. So I think a community, the authorities as well, all asking themselves how possibly this level of abuse to so many children, 12 of the 13 children aged between 2 and 29 suffered this abuse. So many questions being asked now.
OK, Sophie, thanks very much for bringing those details. That sentencing happening just within the last half hour. Sophie Long there, thank you. Well, next, let's stay in the United States, but go over to Washington, where Robert Mueller's report into Russian interference in the US 2016 presidential elections seemed to have created even more questions, and Congress is determined to get answers. The Democrats, who control the key House committees, are using their powers to try and receive a full, unredacted copy of the special prosecutor's findings. But, as Laura Trevelyan reports, this legal and political battle could stretch on for quite a while.
Less than 24 hours after the Attorney General released a redacted version of the Mueller report, Congress stepped in. The Judiciary Committee has issued a subpoena for the full report, saying lawmakers shouldn't be kept in the dark, and they want it by May the 1st.
We need the whole report. We need the whole report, including the underlying documents, unredacted, as has been the case in every previous situation similar to this, where Congress got it all.
The 448-page Mueller report contains many redacted sections relating to intelligence material and ongoing court cases. But it's the public bits of the report which have infuriated the president. He's angry with former White House officials who told Robert Mueller how Mr. Trump tried to thwart the investigation. This morning he tweeted, "Statements are made about me by certain people in the crazy Mueller report, in itself written by 18 angry Democrat Trump haters, which are fabricated and totally untrue." The Mueller report finds no evidence of a criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. It doesn't exonerate the president on obstruction of justice. The White House, though, says Mr. Trump is in the clear.
There wasn't collusion with Russia, and it should be a day that every American can celebrate and not be sorrowful like we've seen over the last 48 hours from the Democrats that are actually sad that the president didn't work as a foreign agent.
The president wants to focus on the 2020 election and what he hopes will be a second term. But with subpoenas flying and some Democrats under pressure from their base to impeach Mr. Trump, the saga of the Mueller report is far from over. Laura Trevelyan, BBC News, Washington.
Well, joining me now is Dr. Matthew Dalek, a Professor of Graduate School of Political Management at the George Washington University. Matthew, good to see you. Yes, this saga goes on and on with the last words in Laura Trevelyan's report. That is probably undisputable. What do the Democrats aim to get out of doing this?
Well, first of all, the Democrats, to conduct a reasonable inquiry, a full and fair inquiry, feel rightly so like they need to have all the information. They need every piece of the report. They want the underlying information. Because remember, the Constitution and the system of checks and balances has a very clear provision that it's Congress that can hold presidents accountable and impeach if they've committed treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. So Congress says, look, this report essentially kicks the process over to us, and now it is our job to carry out our constitutional oath of office by conducting a complete investigation. And that includes having access to the full unredacted report.
OK, you say that investigation. Does that lead inevitably to impeachment proceedings?
Well, I don't think anything is inevitable. I mean, the Democrats are really between the proverbial rock and a hard place, and that at least right now, I think most of them privately feel like they have a moral and constitutional obligation to move down the road toward impeachment because the evidence is so overwhelming. At the same time, though, the politics mitigate against it because there's an election coming up in 18 months. The Mueller report, there was no smoking gun per se on Russia, even if the details are really morally depraved and deeply disturbing. And there's an argument among some Democrats that impeachment is just going to be a partisan abyss, and it's not maybe going to help us in 2020, and that there's another remedy for removing the president, and that's the re-election campaign.
Yeah, before we get to the re-election campaign, I want to pick up on this issue of obstruction of justice and this issue of intent, which seems to be actually slightly more problematic than was first realised. Barr came down, it seemed, and the Attorney General, that is, on the side that you couldn't prove intent here.
Well, first of all, let's back up. I mean, Robert Mueller's team did not subpoena the president. So they essentially said that we felt like we had enough information to make a judgment, and that while there may be some mitigating circumstances, based on what I've seen on the report and the reporting of the report, is that the main reason they didn't prosecute or propose to indict him was the Department of Justice policy that you can't indict a sitting president. Not that there was not a crime committed. So if you read the report, they say that Trump had the intent, right? That he had the motivation, which is that he feared that the investigation was going to uncover other crimes and other politically embarrassing information about him, his business, his campaign. He wanted to keep that hidden from public view. And as he said early on, that when he found out that Mueller was appointed, that he felt like this is a mortal threat to his presidency and he wanted to stop it. So
Okay, Matthew, I'm afraid we're running out of time, but we get that point that you're making there very firmly. Thank you, Dr. Matthew Dalek there. Appreciate it. OK, let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news now. President Trump has spoken by phone to the Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar, whose forces are currently attacking Tripoli. The White House said Mr. Trump had praised the general's fight against terrorism. The phone call happened despite the UN-backed government in Tripoli seeking international condemnation of General Haftar's assault on the capital. 13 people have been killed after a church wall collapsed in South Africa. The accident in KwaZulu-Natal province followed heavy rains. One of the victims is reported to be just 11 years old. Thousands of people in Peru have turned out for the funeral of the former President Alan Garcia. The politician shot himself after the police tried to arrest him on bribery charges. The Peruvian government offered the former president a state funeral, but his family declined. A journalist has been shot dead in Londonderry in Northern Ireland. 29-year-old Lyra McKee was struck by a bullet as she was observing an outbreak of violence in the Cregan district on Thursday night. A vigil for her has been attended by politicians on both sides of the community. Her partner, Sarah Canning, had paid tribute to her as a tireless advocate and activist and described her death as senseless. Police have started a murder inquiry and have blamed dissident Republicans for her death. Here's our Ireland correspondent, Emma Vardy.
Shots ring out, a frightening throwback as violence erupts in Derry. Here, you see a gunman firing at police lines. Then they appear to try to remove the evidence. More than 50 petrol bombs were thrown, say police, and officers were shot at up to 10 times. Journalist Lyra McKee was hit as she stood beside an armoured police vehicle. A reporter nearby tried to help.
I could see a Land Rover and there was a young woman lying on the ground beside the Land Rover unconscious, and her friends were beside her. They hadn't realised what happened. Someone turned around and saw her on the ground and they just started screaming, and it's a sound I'll never forget.
Described as a rising star, Lyra McKee was a gay rights activist and freelance journalist.
Within the LGBT community, we have a saying that we tell people. We tell them it gets better. And what I realised that day was that it gets better for some of us. It gets better for those of us who live long enough to see it get better.
Just after 11 o'clock, Lyra McKee was taken to hospital in a police vehicle, but died of her wound. Officers are treating her death as a terrorist incident and say a murder inquiry has started. This morning, there was dismay that tensions continue to resurface. This city already harbours many memories from Northern Ireland's bloody past.
It's terrible. I felt ashamed to be a Derry man. Those sort of things should be long gone. Should not be happening now. And we need people like Lyra. I'm sorry.
I couldn't believe it. It just feels to me as though we've gone 10 steps back again, you know, so just that type of violence in this town and the loss of a young life. It's very sad, and I'm very sad because this is a lovely town.
Police believe the violence was orchestrated by the group known as the New IRA.
Police say dissident Republicans had been planning to attack officers over the Easter weekend. Yesterday, they carried out raids here on Derry's Cregan estate looking for firearms. The response was the violence which led to Lyra McKee's death.
This is a horrendous act. It's unnecessary, it's uncalled for, it's totally unjustified. But not only is it the murder of a young woman, it's an attack again upon the people of this city.
Hundreds lined the streets as political leaders from all the main parties and both sides of the political divide came together in a show of unity.
We have political leaders, religious leaders, civic society, all standing shoulder to shoulder to say we do not want to see this, we're not going backwards.
We all have to stand against this. This is an attack on democracy. It's an attack on everybody that's standing here today.
Lyra McKee's partner publicly grieved.
And it's left me without the love of my life, the woman I was planning to grow old with.
we're all poor for the loss of Lyra.
Despite the gains Derry has made, today there is a deep sense of loss. Many hope to see a renewed stand against those who threaten to take the city back to its violent past.
Next, the international climbing community is in shock after the loss of 3 highly experienced mountain athletes. Jess Ross Kelly, David Lama and Hans-Jörg Auer are all missing, presumed dead, after an avalanche swept down their route in Canada's Rocky Mountains. The 3 men climbed mountains professionally and between them had conquered some of the toughest routes around the globe. Well, joining us is their friend and fellow climber Francis Sanzaro, who is also the editor of Rock and Ice magazine. I'm very sorry to be talking to you under these dreadful circumstances. Do we know any more about what happened?
Unfortunately, we don't know. We don't have much more information as to what happened. The conditions are pretty bad. There's a lot of fog and snow in that particular area. And the avalanche danger is really high to get rescue operations as to where their bodies were found, or at least one body was sighted from a helicopter. So not much more information. However, it's pretty much agreed upon that they did not survive the avalanche.
And this is, 3 people who really were experienced, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. These were young, strong, cutting-edge alpinists. I think maybe the equivalent would be losing Ronaldo, Messi, and maybe Neymar, in one very quick, having them, all of a sudden just hearing about their death, right? They're no longer alive, and it just happened just like that. And that's the way it works in climbing. So it was very tragic for our community. We suffer a lot of deaths as it is in the alpine community, and to have 3 of our leading climbers go we were heartbroken, absolutely.
Yeah, that must be a strange situation for you and your community to be in. Us looking in from the outside, there are such, high risks, and this is something that everyone who takes part, knows that going in. It must be strange and very difficult for you guys to constantly have to receive news like this.
It is. That's a great point. It's all year long we have to report on the deaths of our friends. It's a small community, but unfortunately the mortality rate just isn't in the favor of, especially alpinists. When you're out there in the elements, it's extremely risky. There's a lot of things that are out of your control, and it's just very, very dangerous. Despite being, taking as many precautions as you can, it's a dangerous game, we always say, and we have to deal with death all the time.
I just want to reflect on some of their achievements. What are some of the things that they'll be remembered for, professionally or personally?
Well, I think that each David Lama, Hans-Jörg Auer, and Jess Ross Kelly were all really talented. I think they have different backgrounds. I think David Lama will be known as one of the most versatile alpinists out there. He started out as a competition climber, then transitioned to extremely hard outdoor climbing. I mean, top of the game. And then he made the transition to alpine climbing, where you're climbing peaks with snow and ice a little bit later, maybe in his late teens. And he just basically made a name for himself by climbing the hardest stuff pretty quickly and in a bold fashion. Hans-Jörg Auer was a free soloist in the sense that he became very well known for climbing alone and without a rope, which obviously is very dangerous. But he seemed to enjoy that, like a lot of climbers. And he kind of first made his name in 2007 for soloing a 3,000-foot rock climb, the Dolomites, which was very difficult. And Jess Ross Kelly, the only American of that group, the 2 others were Austrian, will be known for doing the first ascent of a really incredible ridge in Mount Huntington, and for being just a really strong Alaskan climber, for putting up new routes over the past decade. And he also was the youngest person to climb Everest when he was younger. And so they're all will be known for just pushing the sport and for just being really enthusiastic and being really good guys. I've worked with all of them. They're all great guys.
Okay.
And love the mountains.
Francis Sanzaro, thank you very much for those tributes. Thank you. Next, climate change activists across Europe have stepped up their protests against what they say is government inaction against global warming. Simultaneous protests took place in several European capitals. In Paris, demonstrations cordoned off corporate headquarters with police-style tape. They brandished slogans and demanded action from President Macron. In Rome, the Swedish teenage activist Greta Thunberg addressed a packed rally. She said adults had given false hope to the young. And in London, the Oscar-winning actor Emma Thompson joined a mass protest in a show of solidarity. Hundreds of police officers closed in on protesters as demonstrations entered a fifth day. Sangeeta Maiska reports.
Following 5 days of disruption, the police began the work of removing the pink boat, the rallying point for climate change protesters in the heart of the UK's busiest shopping district, Oxford Circus. Earlier today, 1,000 police officers had poured onto London's streets, drafted in to end the climate change protests that have brought parts of the capital to a standstill. The Home Secretary says he expects the police to use the full force of the law to end the disruption.
It is certainly different to the sort of protests we're used to, and of course we are an organisation that learns, and we will debrief this operation once it's finished, and we will learn what works and what didn't work. And so if groups choose to take this approach again in the future, we'll be far better placed to deal with it more swiftly, I think.
At Waterloo Bridge, a stone's throw from Parliament, it's a game of cat and mouse. Campaigners are lifted and removed by officers, some to return hours later to do the same again. In 5 days, nearly 700 arrests, and no end in sight.
So I've come out to do my bit, and we're going to come back on Monday, and we'll be getting arrested again, and probably maybe locking on here again, or doing whatever's necessary until the government's prepared to speak with us.
Today in France, officers used very different tactics. At the French bank, Société Générale, police used pepper spray to remove climate change protesters who'd blocked employees from getting into work. Back at Oxford Street, retailers claim the disruption has cost them millions of pounds and lost trade. But campaigners say it's a price worth paying until their calls for radical government action to combat climate change are acted on. Sangeeta Maiska, BBC News.
Professional footballers in England and Wales are boycotting social media for 24 hours in protest against the way social networks and football authorities respond to racism. It follows a number of high-profile incidents in domestic and international matches this season. Well, I'm joined by Keith Parry, a senior lecturer in the Department of Sport, Exercise and Health at the University of Winchester in the UK. His research interests are based on the sociology of sport. OK, Keith, what are the football authorities getting wrong then?
Oh, well, that's a difficult. Lots of things, I guess, to a large extent. There's been a lack of action for a long time here. Racism has been taking place on social media. It's been taking place at the grounds. It's been taking place between players for some time. It's perhaps not as bad as it has been going back some years in the UK, but globally, it's not changing. We're seeing it happening in many countries around the world. So we need to see some stiffer sanctions, some greater penalties, and much more importantly, I think, is education of the fans and of perhaps the authorities as well in terms of how to deal with it and what the problems are as such.
On sanctions, there's been a lot of criticism that football teams or countries are fined, but it's not enough.
Yeah, for a long time, FIFA have been doing that. They've been issuing a fine that's maybe a few thousand euros, a few £1,000s, but for many of the big organisations and teams, that's really little. Now they've brought in what they call the three-step procedure, where they can take players off the pitch and abandon matches. But again, is that going to do enough to really stop fans and to really have an impact? Probably not. So yeah, that type of sanction in terms of just a financial one isn't working. It needs to be something more serious than that. There's been a lot of talk of teams being thrown out of the Champions League or thrown out of their league structure, and it may need something like that to really show that there is a problem here, or that it's not acceptable.
Okay.
So until we see that, then perhaps it won't change.
Well, OK, Keith Parry, thank you. Yeah, difficult issue and no quick and easy solutions, obviously, but thank you very much for giving us your insight. Thank you. OK, remember, of course, you can get in touch with me on Twitter anytime. I'm at at L Vaughan-Jones. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. I'll be back with the headlines in a couple of minutes, but you are watching BBC News. Bye-bye.
Hello, plenty of spring warmth and sunshine across Europe this weekend, but there are exceptions. The main one, I think, across the southwest of the continent. You can see this swirl of cloud, a very slow-moving area of low pressure that will just continue to feed wet weather across parts of Iberia, particularly for the southeast of Spain. We develop a persistent east or southeasterly breeze, and that is just going to pile wet weather into these southeastern parts of Spain. There is the risk of flooding as we head through the next couple of days. And further east as well, another area of low pressure bringing some showers across Turkey. A lot of cloud left behind for parts of Romania and Bulgaria. Lots of sunshine in Italy, 21 degrees in Rome. The rain continues for southeastern Spain, but for the north of Spain and Portugal, something drier, brighter and warmer to come. One or two thunderstorms breaking out across the heart of France. Very warm again across the UK, the Low Countries and into much of Germany. Lots of sunshine here once again as we go on through Sunday. Still these brisk easterly or southeasterly winds across Corsica and Sardinia into the eastern side of Spain. The winds themselves could cause some disruption, but also delivering some further heavy showers. Also, for a time, much cooler in Madrid. Those temperatures down into the teens over the next few days. It stays pretty warm in Paris. In Moscow, a lot of cloud, but temperatures climbing to 20 degrees, and it looks mainly fine in Athens.
Indian armed forces are fighting what are believed to be perhaps three militants who are hiding in there.
The Arc de Triomphe is back under police control, but there are still lots of protesters out there. There's still the tang of tear gas.
How could it have happened right in the capital? How could heavily armed militants have driven around undetected?
The Islamic State used to stretch all the way from Libya to Iraq and across Syria. Well, it's been reduced to this tiny pocket, just 30 square kilometres.
The intent is serious, to send a message to President Nicolas Maduro that time is up.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
Recovery right now. In a world of complex global news stories, we'll sift through the information to bring you what matters most. And with reaction and reporting in real time,
our immigration laws are a laughingstock all over the world.
You'll know what's happening around the world as we do.
And that these new measures won't actually stop Venezuelans coming over, it will just make the migrant crisis worse.
Whatever the story, we'll piece it together. Join me, Ros Atkins, for Outside Source on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. The headlines. An American couple who tortured 13 children in a so-called House of Horrors have been sentenced to life in prison. David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 counts of cruelty, torture and false imprisonment. Democrats in the US say they'll continue to pursue President Trump over his actions detailed in the Mueller report into election interference by Russia in 2016. The powerful House Judiciary Committee has issued a subpoena for the full unredacted version. The British Prime Minister Theresa May has condemned the murder of a journalist in Northern Ireland. Lyra McKee was shot dead during overnight rioting in Londonderry. Police are treating it as a terrorist incident. Climate change protests are being held across Europe. Police in central London have moved in and surrounded activists who've been blocking key junctions in the city all week.
Now on BBC World News, our weekly in-depth look at the economic trends that are shaping Africa's future. Nancy Kachingira and Lerato and Bailey Roberts with In Business Africa.
Welcome to In Business Africa. I'm Nancy Kachingira in Kigali, Rwanda, also known as the land of 1,000 hills. This week we'll be taking a look at efforts being made in different sectors of the economy here to deliver